pretty basic, everybody pretty much knows it, but what I like to establish first, how many people have experience talking on official radio networks? Okay, good, so a lot of this will just be review for you guys, okay? So basically, first off, we're gonna talk about just communication itself, and communication is important because it's gonna play a role in just about everything we do from here on out. All right, seeing how people communicate, what they're doing, their types of communication. It's gonna help you, as a security person, either recognize a threat, recognize help, recognize these different things. So communication is highly important. So basically how communication works, you have three elements. You have a sender, medium, and receiver, all right? The sender creates the message. The medium is either verbal, written, or visual or non-verbal, okay? And examples of all those, verbal is just like a text, email. Verbal, I mean, it's like me talking to you. Written is text, email, any of that stuff, DMs. Visual is just anything, you know, it's eye contact with somebody, it's a smile, it's how you place your hands on your hips, it's whether you cross your arms when you're talking to somebody. Those are all visual cues in communication, visual communication. Tics, people have tics sometimes when they talk to you. It can be distracting. I used to have a friend of mine that every time he would say a word, he'd go, hey, how are you doing? He couldn't help that, right? I met a gal one time in Home Depot, as she talked to me, she'd just go and keep talking. And at first I was like, what the heck? And she saw me doing it, she says, I have Tourette's. And that's how she saw. You know, saw me watching her face, and I was like, and she says, I have Tourette's, and that's what happens. I said, okay. And then other forms of Tourette's, people scream, they scare, they swear. They'll just, for no reason, just go, oh! You know? So you'll see these different forms. Those aren't actual communication methods, so kind of be aware of what you're looking at. If you see somebody that's doing something odd, could be they have Tourette's, or it could be they have some sort of disorder that causes them to do that. But as we go through it, we'll talk about these different areas. All right, fundamentals of communication. First thing is the message must be clear, all right? And how many times have you said something to someone and had them look at you and go, huh? All right, so obviously you didn't pass that message on. Or here's a better case. How many times have you received a text, thought it meant something different, texted back an answer, and got a response like, what? Are you mad at me? What did I do? All right? Again, the message has to be clear. When we're dealing with radio communications, it needs to be concise, it needs to be short, because you don't want to take up a whole bunch of air time, okay? So, and then it must be received. For that message to be communication, the receiver has to receive the message, okay? And how do we know that? It must be understood and it must be acknowledged. So when the receiver receives it, if they come back with what, or why, or say again, okay? They didn't understand what you were saying, so you have to repeat the message. If they acknowledge it, and with a copy, Roger, all right, that means I heard you and I understand you. Okay. Same thing for any verbal communication. If I'm talking to Billy and Billy's looking at me and he's nodding his head up and down, I have a pretty good clue that he's understanding what I'm saying to him. All right. So I'm getting the fact I know the message is received, I know it's understood, and I know it has been acknowledged. All right, functions of communication. Now, some of these things I had to update because my old communications thing was from the military, so there was a lot of stuff in there that's good, but it's very basic, and it didn't express the updates in how we communicate today, like with Signal, with text messaging, all right, some of the other avenues that are out there. So, looking into it, I found communication can be informative, sharing facts, data, knowledge. It can be persuasive, all right? Influencing attitudes or behaviors, all right? So what the good examples of these is informative is like when Gabe's up there and he's reading, let's say, from Peter, and he's just giving us the facts, the data, all right? And then he begins to tell us about that information. Well, that begins to influence our behaviors, our attitudes, okay? Expressive, Gabe's good at, facial expression, looking at the whole crowd, all right? So he conveys his emotions as he's up there. Directive's a little different, and this would be more along my military lines. So directives is simply giving instructions or commands, all right? Directives are information that you want understood and you want acknowledged, but you don't want to be questioned. You just want it to be done, okay? One of the things we used to say when I taught in the military was, swearing is good for emphasizing a point. It's not good for criticizing a person, all right? So if we swore in class, it was to emphasize a point, all right? It wasn't to demean a person. Can be social, just building relationships in community, can be motivational, can be cultural. For the most part, the types of communications we're going to do on the radio are going to be informative and directive. Right? We're going to be passing information back and forth, and we're going to be giving instruction. All right, and this was something that I had never heard. It's kind of a breakdown of the first three that I gave you, but this is kind of broken it into a whole bunch of different ones. The originator of the message is the sender. We talked about that. We talked about the message. Now, encoding, the process of converting the message into symbols, words, gestures that can be understood. I never even thought about that, and then I got to thinking about texting and emojis. Emojis are a way of encoding information. So I can understand that. So kind of bringing it into modern thinking, if we're texting or if we're using some sort of data other than verbal, then yes, there is encoding. Channel, the medium through which the message is transmitted, spoken word, and that goes back to what I call medium, same thing. The receiver is the group or the attended. The decoding is the process by which the receiver interprets and makes sense of the message. Okay. So if you send me an emoji I don't understand, then I can't decode that information. Or if you use a word over the radio that I don't understand, then I can't decode that message, so I'm not receiving the message. Right. Feedback. Feedback's very important, especially when we're talking about radio communications. We want to be concise. Radios get interference, they get walked on, things happen. All right, so it is very important that if you hear a message, you either acknowledge it or you say again. I didn't get that. All right, that's what that means. Say again is pretty simple. Or, can you repeat that? All right, just so it comes back. I used to have an ASAPer who used to drive me crazy. I'd call for fire, and I'd give a coordinate. I'd say Buddha, Dusty, call for fire, Whiskey Gray Delta, and I'd give the coordinates. And he'd go, Roger, say again. What? What? You understand what you want me to repeat it? And so we did a debrief one time after a training mission, and I sat him down and I was like, why do you always say Roger? He says, well, that's what I told you do when I hear a message. I go, Roger the message. I go, no, if you don't hear what I say, you just say, repeat that. And I will repeat the coordinates. I said, it's very confusing to me on the other end, and everybody else who's listening, when you say Roger, say again.
Copy, what was that?
Yeah. So feedback's very important. Context, all right, this is the environment or situation in which communication takes place, including cultural, social, physical settings. So going back to the texting, a lot of times we lose context in texting, especially if it's a text that changes what we were talking about. All right, context can get lost pretty quick. All right, same thing on radio, because I can't see you when you're talking to me. All I hear is the message, and if the message sounds to me like it's coming across high-pitched or fast, then I immediately assume threat, or I assume something's wrong. All right? So we have to be very clear and concise when we're talking on the radio.
Do you have more papers, Sam?
Oh, I do. I almost got it.
Thank you.
All right, components of a radio communication system. So there's three primary components. You have the transmitter, all right? And the transmitter basically converts your voice into electrical current, into RF waves, or VHF waves, UHF waves, and propagates it out across through an antenna. All right? The receiver is at the other end. It does the same thing. It takes those radio waves, all right, via the antenna and turns them back into sound. All right? Propagation channels, the medium through which the radio waves travel, can be terrestrial, atmospheric, or ionospheric. So we're basically using atmospheric. All right? We're not traveling. We don't have a hardwired like a handheld, hardwired radio. All right, so it's not going to be terrestrial. It's going to be atmospheric. And another thing about terrestrial too. So if you think about HF propagation, HF will bend, but HF will also bounce off things and continue on because it has such a low angle of incidence and its frequency. UHF, VHF are high enough frequencies that they do bounce, but they weaken so much when they bounce. All right, so a lot of times a reflection you can't hear, and that's why you see the Forest Service, the police force, everybody has repeaters because they know that if that signal has to travel too much further, it'll get so weak that it can't be heard, or it'll just run out of line of sight. Line of sight down here where we're at probably 7, 8 miles max. On the ocean, you're looking about 13. All right. But since we have terrain, very, very terrain limited. All right, frequency spectrum, VHF, UHF, and HF. So most handheld radios are in the VHF or UHF bands. Okay. VHF is very high frequency. UHF is ultra high frequency. And the only difference is the number of zeros. Okay. So VHF is a lower frequency than UHF. Lower frequencies travel further than higher frequencies. And that's because the higher the frequency, the more it oscillates the moisture in the air and the more energy it burns as it goes through the air. And so it bleeds off sooner. Right? So the lower the frequency, the further it travels. HF is the lowest frequency. And literally you can talk around the world with HF. Okay. VHF, all these radios, with the exception of HF, are line of sight radios. VHF is probably going to travel a further line of sight than UHF will, because UHF is basically going to dissipate by traveling through the air. Okay. In space, in a vacuum where there's none of that, they'll travel the same distance, and they all travel at the same speed level. All right, so that's the basics of what radios are and what they do. Now we're going to talk some radio etiquette. All right, always identify yourself and your intended contact. All right, so for our purposes, it would be station 1 to station 4, station 3 to station 1. All right, when you're on the radio, so you know who you're talking to. Like we talked about in the previous one, we're going to have a team lead. That team lead is going to be whatever that station is. We're going to say the reason, and I don't want to use names, is I suspect, just from having listened to the radio, that when we start talking on the radio, others are listening, and then we start getting interference. The frequency starts getting clobbered with people chit-chatting. All right, so we're going to institute a little different thing with the team leads now. So we'll have a secondary and a tertiary frequency, and it'll be separated from the primary that we start out on. And then if we start getting clobbered, you just say all channels, switch to secondary frequency. And then once you switch, you immediately station 1, station 2, station 3, everybody checks in, and then you get quiet and you listen and see if they're tracking you. Because it is going to take, with them not knowing what secondary frequency is, it's going to take them a while to try and figure out where you're at. Okay. Think about what you're going to say before transmitting. This shouldn't take 10 minutes. It just, think, I want to talk to David real quick. I want to ask him what the count was. So I'm going to think, all right. David, what's count? Station 2, station 4. What was our count today? Over. All right. Now David's going to hear that. He's going to go stand by. And if he's talked to Tyler or whoever, he's going to get back to me. Station 4, station 2. Our count was 450. Real simple. Push talk discipline. Wait a moment before speaking to avoid cutting off messages. So most radios have about a half second, a quarter second to a half second delay before they actually start transmitting. So when you hit the button, about a quarter second there before it starts. So if you're talking, David, he's not gonna hear David. He'll hear the rest of the message, but nobody will know who station 4 is talking to. Okay? They'll just know there was a message from station 4. So push the button, talk. Acknowledge communications once transmission is complete. Acknowledge it by saying copy or asking clarifying questions. So if you hear a message and you don't get it, and this happens all the time with those headsets that we have, you'll hear something and it's like, ooh, is that for us or not? Especially if we get a lot of chit chat on that frequency. It's like, ooh, was that for us or not? I always just ask, say again. You know, say your last, say again. And then hopefully you guys will hear that. So always acknowledge it. If you don't need to ask a question, just say copy. Communications lead. So responsibilities. Communications lead are the team lead for our purposes. Assigns primary, secondary, tertiary frequencies for the day. Ensures all team members are on proper frequency. Conducts radio checks with all team members and schoolroom radios. All right. I do that every time I have security. I walk back. I turn on the radio. I step away from it. I turn it up loud enough that I step away from it. I key my mic. I listen for the click. Okay, it's good. So I know that radio is going to receive transmissions. Okay. Scan frequencies for crowding. Let's say we come up on 5 as our initial frequency, and you know there's a couple kids out fishing and they're chit chatting with each other. Right? We don't need to go to 5. We'll start out on a different frequency. I like to keep frequency separations for tertiary and secondary at least 2 frequencies apart, and that way it takes someone a second or 2 to try and track you down. Calls for frequency swap if crowding or interference occurs. All stations swap secondaries or tertiary, whatever you call it. And then you will ensure that all stations are backed up on that frequency. And you can do that if you think you're being interfered with. You can basically just walk around everybody and say, did you make it to channel 8? Are you on channel 8? Or you can actually key and transmit. The problem with keying and transmitting, if you didn't get a copy from, or a response from everybody as they change channels, is may have been enough time for that person to find you, and you may wind up with interference. Just something to think about. All right, so these are the basics right now. I got a couple of quick videos, and then after that, what we'd like to do is break into 2 groups. We'll stand at each end of the hallways here, into 2 groups, radio at each end, radio at each end of the other hallway, and just practice making a call on the radio. You can say anything you want, just identify yourself and who you're talking to, pass your message. The other end, once the message is complete, we'll copy, and then vice versa. I want people to get practice keying the button, talking into that radio. All right.
So,
Yes. Figure out how to get this over to you. Am I doing it? I
Yeah.
did it. I gotta get my mouse back over. Okay. Yeah, Troy.
I was just curious, is there truly a proper way to speak across the microphone? I've heard people say you don't speak into it, I've heard people say speak across it.
Yeah.
I assume you're gonna teach that.
Yeah, well, yeah, so the best way to talk on the radio, especially since we have the little mics, is just bend your head over. Don't talk directly into it, talk past it. All right? So if you have a handheld, just set it at the side of your mouth and talk past it. If you talk into it, basically your breath hits that radio and causes static and causes chatter. All right.
The safety of users is a top priority for organizations who provide radio communications. Clear, concise communications are critical to worker safety. So in this video, we will provide 6 principles that demonstrate the best way to use a microphone to ensure clear, concise communication. Although we're using a speaker microphone and a portable, These principles apply when speaking directly into a portable
It's on the
or
side,
when using a mobile radio
the
microphone
side
as
of
well.
the remote.
First, you need to push and
Oh.
hold the PTT button throughout your transmission. A common mistake many users new to radio make is starting their conversation before they finish pressing the PTT button, or letting go of the PTT button before their transmission is complete. Although you might only miss one or two words, those one or two words could be very important. Many trunked and digital radios will provide the user a beep, so make sure you wait for the beep before speaking. Second, you should hold the microphone between 2 and 5 centimeters from your mouth. A common mistake is talking too far away from the microphone. This makes the audio more susceptible to room noise, reverb, and harsh tones. On the flip side, getting too close to the mic can be bad too. You'll pick up excessive breathing, mouth noises, and pops from others like PNT, which are called plosives. Many users keep their radios on their lapel, which works great because it's about that right amount of distance. So 2 to 5 centimeters or 1 to 2 inches. Next, you should talk past the microphone instead of directly into it. When you talk straight into it, that creates a lot of plosives. Those gusts of air, puffs of air go from your mouth into the microphone and can cause some
Plosives.
trouble. Pivot the mic around your mouth so that you're talking past the mic instead of into the mic. Again, keeping it on your lapel will help ensure that you talk past the microphone instead of directly into it. Fourth, don't rattle the microphone. Try to avoid movement of the microphone in your hand while transmitting. Any movement can translate into background noises or inconsistent volume levels, which detract from the quality of the transmitted signal. Fifth, when possible, avoid noise around the microphone. What you do away from the mic is just as important as in front of the microphone. So, if possible, avoid loud keyboards, squeaking chairs, cracking knuckles, whispered conversations, background noisemakers, and anything else. It's always better to speak in a quieter area. So, if possible, move to a less noisy location to improve the quality of your speech. Or, at a minimum, try and cover up to block some of that outside noise. And sixth, speak clearly in your normal voice. That means you don't need to sound, and you don't want to speak too fast because it makes it difficult for people to understand you. Divide your message into natural phrases rather than individual words so that what you say flows smoothly. So there you have it. Following these 6 principles when you use your radio will improve audio clarity and therefore increase safety.
So if anyone is looking for these videos, one of the videos, the first thing the guy says is, you have to talk forcefully into your radio so you can push the information through. I was like, whoa.
They need this for their mission for next week.
Yes. Yes, we do. 2 seconds. Start.
There it is.
Morning, Pete. Coffee's on and your Uber's on its way.
You know, I've been thinking, maybe I should just go by Peter now?
Peter Davidson. Not bad.
Sounds like I'm gonna try and sell you an extended
Yeah.
We have all
warranty.
radio
How about
operators
Petey?
should be to get
I know a dog named Petey.
Little P or Big D?
Oh, what about Double P?
You want to go by Pete
Oh,
Pete?
You know what? I think I'm just gonna stick with Pete.
Where's it at?
Pete. I like it.
Make me feel
I like you too.
First, listen before you call. If someone's already talking, I'm you want to use.
And then go over to your other
It's
tab.
gonna be really easy. Try to